of CSR Committee of Bengal Chamber and Commerce. So on behalf of BCCI and on behalf of all our guest speakers, I welcome to all the participants to this webinar. And before we formally start this webinar, I trust all participants are safe and healthy. And I'm delighted to have a distinguished panel of our speakers. I'll just read out the name of the speakers for benefit all of you. We have Mr. Dhruv Balla, who is the Senior Vice President and Head International Relations, Corporate Strategy and Planning with Shrey Infrastructure Finance Limited. We have Mr. Rajesh Mishra, Executive Vice President, Strategy and Corporate Services, Tata Motors Limited. We have Mr. Deepak Kumar Khaitan, a very senior practicing company secretary with Deepak Khaitan and Company. And we also have Dr. Shruti Chakravarti, who is Assistant Director at CINI, a very reputed NGO based in Kolkata. We also delighted to have Mr. Sumit Dasgupta, who is the founder and director of All Cap Communications Private Limited. He is going to moderate this session. Just kind of, a briefing for Mr. Dasgupta. He is a very senior member of our Bengal chambers, having more than 24 years of journalist experience with ABP Group. Mr. Dasgupta was the editor of Metro and T2 and deputy editor of the from 1999 to 2008. So I now, hand over this, session to our moderator, Mr. Sumit Dasgupta, to take it forward. So over to you, Mr. Dasgupta.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Good afternoon, everybody. And without wasting any time, let us get straight to the matter on hand today. So CSR experts around the world are saying that we are entering post-COVID, we are entering what they are calling the age of responsibility, where companies and organizations will not only have to be seen to be responsible, but also really act responsibly. So in that context, today's discussion is extremely important at a very critical time. And without further ado, let me bring in, let me lob it back to Mr. Kumar, not only the chair of this committee, but also the company secretary and EVP Legal and Administration, and excited in that piece. So Mr. Kumar, if you could just set the tone of this discussion by giving us an overview and your views on the rationale and timing of the proposed CSR amendment. Over to you, Mr. Kumar.
Just to begin with, this under Section 135 of the Companies Act, we have this, CSR provision for about more than 6 years now. So when it started almost 6 years back, so the intent of the government was to, start in a slow and gradual manner so that, all corporates, all NGOs, intermediaries get used to the provisions of this, of the CSR spending and utilization. And then gradually try to, once the clarity is there, then probably try to more supervise in a coordinator in a proper directions. So that is the, I believe, the broad objective of the CSR amendment, which is now going to come, which is proposed under this 2020 amendment policy. Just to begin with, there are certain earlier what the corporate used to do when somebody is not going to spend the entire utilization. So we were asked to explain the rationale of why and the objective why this entire spend was not achieved. So it was just not spend or explain. So there are a lot of corporates. In fact, the majority of the corporates are following in the letter end spirit of 2% spending of the entire CSR into those identified Schedule 7 activities. But there are few companies who are probably taking the loophole of or leniency of the draft CSR provisions. They were kind of a habitual, non-spending. They're not spending anything on that. So this being, we are, we are very socially responsible corporate. When society is giving so much to the industries, it becomes our responsibility to ensure to give it back to the society as much as possible. So with this intent, the government has come up with this new proposed amendment where there will be, a little bit more stringent provisions on spending the entire 2%. If some corporate is not able to spend 2%, then it has to be carried forward for a period of 3 years. And then finally, it will move to a dedicated fund of the central government. Plus, there are so many provisions pertaining to registration of the intermediaries, registration of Section 8 companies through which all these projects can be implemented. So there are so many loopholes which earlier in the earlier provisions, the government want to plug those loopholes and try to become more comprehensive so that the society as a whole benefits out of all these CSR provisions. So that is the overall, and the government thinks that means after 5 years, 6 years, it has given sufficient time for all corporates and the intermediaries to habituate with all the provisions, and this is the probably right time to introduce the new CSR provisions as been proposed. So lot of representation has gone from corporate side, chamber side, individual side. So I believe the government is going to consider all those things, and I sincerely hope that there will be some good number of changes from what it has been proposed. So when it finally sees the light, it will be a little bit slightly modified CSR, this draft amendment rules, and hopefully as a society we all benefit out of this entire CSR amendment rules. So that is the overall rationale which I would say behind this the proposed CSR Amendment Rules 2020.
Staying with you, Mr. Kumar, one of the provisions in the amendment says that the board needs to take an increased responsibility and obligation, and the CSR committee will only remain as a recommending body. What do you feel would be the implications if this comes into effect?
So I think in earlier CSR rules, I mean the responsibility of the board was more on the directional side. It used to give the broad directives, and then the CSR committee, which is supposed to be a dedicated committee to look after all the planning, strategizing, execution, supervising. So this problem is earlier coming under the purview of the CSR committee. So now, the intent of the new amendment is to ensure giving more responsibility on the part of the board itself. So if you see the rule 4, 5, 7, rule 9, so under various rules, they have imposed the greater responsibility on the board, right from planning side to implementation side, to the strategizing, to supervisions, everywhere, it is the increased responsibility of the board to ensure that, the CSR provisions are followed in letter and spirit. So, it goes both ways. I'm not sure how the board of all the companies will like to take these added responsibilities on their part, because with additional responsibility, it comes, they have to devote so much of time and effort in the board meeting, which it was taken by the CSR committee. So what I feel that, the responsibility of CSR committee will be somewhat diluted, and it will more go towards the board. So ideally, as I told, some of the board would like to spend more time into, implementation side of these things. But on the flip side, some of the board would like to be a little bit on the conservative side and say, rather than going for 50 projects, I like to just give 1 or 2 projects and give it to PM Relief Fund or other funds, which has kind of less botheration and less responsibility, so that nothing comes back to them if something. So it has its positive, it has its negative.
Right. If we can bring in Mr. Dhruv Bhalla. Mr. Bhalla, the draft amendment rules has also proposed that CSR may include activities having less than 25% employees as its beneficiary. What do you see as an impact in terms of the organization's employee engagement and other aspects?
Thank you, Sumit. First and foremost, thank you, BCCI, for this platform. I think Jitendra has captured a lot of the overview of what the amendment bill has to say very well. In terms of the employee engagement and the welfare for below 25%. Look, we've been battling a few questions on this CSR amendment bill and the ongoing issues with CSR for quite some time. So we've been actually writing a lot of white, paper policy recommendations to the government, through the chambers as well, because I think in terms of clarity, there is lack of clarity. You can't just simply say 25% or less should be beneficiaries of a particular, CSR initiative or initiatives as a whole. There requires a lot more clarity in terms of how you segregate that 25. On what parameters you segregate that 25, especially companies that have a very, very large national presence. It becomes a little more tricky in terms of how are you going to really engage with your employees from a larger HR perspective and really identify who falls under this 25% bracket. Now, as an NBFC or as a financial institution, which also applies to other service-related sectors, I think, it makes it a lot simpler. For example, at Shrey, we've capped it at about 10 to 11%. More so to employees where we find that they are either under a certain income level and their immediate families can benefit from some of the CSR, that we could do for them vis-a-vis medical, insurance, so on and so forth. But where, in my opinion, this really applies is more to the manufacturing sectors, to the FMCG sectors, where you have a larger labor class. And it becomes a lot more transparent in a way to really, kind of trickle down as to who these 25% could be, because the parameters are a lot more clear. Again, to go back to your point, I think there are a few unanswered questions where we are still trying to get clarity from the government on how exactly we define this 25. We leave it to the best judgment of corporates as to how they choose to really pass down this benefit to the employees and how they wish to. So, for example, like I said earlier, at Shrey, we've capped it about 10 to 11%. But again, to really maximize the entire benefit of 25%, there is a lot that can be done. And I think we have a lot of unanswered questions.
Exactly. And now moving on to a slightly more contentious question for you, Dhruv. One of the provisions is that funds that have been to the Chief Minister's Relief Fund, the State Relief Fund, will be admissible as CSR expenditure. Organizations who've already put money into the such funds, what will be the impact, and what do you think is a viable resolution for this?
See, again, this is another very, very sort of tricky and debatable point. Sometimes very volatile in nature. According to us, I think we need, again, the way we need to look at it is how does the organization perceive itself? Do you look, is it an organization that has a national presence? If so, maybe the option of the PM fund is a better option, where you do get the benefits of CSR, which is what we have done to a certain extent. The CM fund, again, becomes touchy because, companies that are really opting for the CM fund are doing it knowing fully that they are not getting the benefits of CSR, at least as of now. So if they're doing it, I don't want to use the word fatwa, but they are doing it under a very, very sort of strict direction. Again, these are questions that every individual company has to see for themselves. how they want to look at their CSR spends. As for us, because we have a national presence, the answer is fairly clear. When we feel that we do not have enough going on in our own CSR initiatives, we opt for the PM Relief Fund. We haven't looked at the PM COVID Fund yet, but the PM Relief Fund, which we've constantly been supporting over the years. Fortunately for us, our CSR initiatives are more than what the 2% allocates towards this initiative. And so are most of the larger corporates who have a foundation, which comprises of various CSR initiatives. So to answer your question, I'm sorry I'm being a little vague because I think we are all vague. But vis-a-vis the PM fund and the CM fund, it's a call that individual companies have to take based on their position, on how they perceive themselves as an institution in India.
Thanks, Dhruv. I believe Mr. Deepak Kumar Khaitan, your views on this, you have very clear views on this. So if we can bring you in, please.
Thank you, sir, for this. Thank you, Bengal Chamber, for this opportunity. I would like to read the circulars and the FAQ from a very, very fine legal perspective.
Right.
And as Dhruvji has very rightly pointed out, it is more depending on the individual organization who wants to spend where. But deliberately going and saying that it must fall under CSR because I have done there is a small question mark. And I will only go through the fine print. So if just for information of everybody. If you read very clearly the circular of 23rd of March, right? It talks about COVID spending as an activity. It does not talk about COVID spending as a contribution. And as professionals, we have to be very clear. There is a fine line of difference between a contribution and an activity. 23rd March circular talks about COVID spending as an activity. It very clearly specifies the items in the schedule from 1 to 12 by writing them out and says that, for these activities should be treated liberally. But when people are saying, I'm reading liberally, then they are forgetting the word activity, which has been repeated twice in that. So if I would read that 23rd March circular with full heart and mind in place, then it is very clear that at that point of time, say the CSR committee would have taken up and approved one more activity as a COVID activity. And then that company through its board system or otherwise would have taken up that activity. But people have gone and done that spending for various reasons as a contribution, not as an activity. Then the 28th March circular which came, that very clearly talked about COVID spending as a contribution and not as an activity. And in that case, in contribution, it specified a particular entity and it said that PM Cares will contribution to PM Cares will qualify. So if we take both of them together, sir, the 23rd March and 28th March, and look at the schedule, it will be very clear that in the schedule, in very specific places, 4 or 5 places, the word contribution has been used. Rest other places, the focus is on activity. And whenever there is a word contribution, so I'm again not talking of donation per se, which goes normally. This is a specific contribution pursuant to a law, and then an entity has been specified. So there is no room for any doubt on that. So that is what I would say if we read from a fine print legal perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Khaitan. We'll get back to you regarding other aspects of this topic. If we move to Mr. Rajesh Mishra of Tata Metallics Limited, if we could request you to throw light on the topic of asset creation, which, as mentioned under Regulation 7.3, it is the consequences of the proposed spend by a company for creation or acquisition of assets shall only be held by a company established under Section 8 of the Act. So having charitable objects or a public authority. So if you can throw some light on this and where do you see this going, Mr. Mishra?
Thank you, Sumit, and good afternoon to everybody. This issue of creation of an asset or assets, and that should be held by a Section 8 company, may lead to some kind of, in my opinion, a mistrust with the community. And generally what happens when corporates spend some money on CSR in a community, the assets are generally expected to be owned by the community themselves. I'll give an example. Say at Tata Metallics, we have a lot of villages around our plant in Kharagpur, and we are putting up a lot of water-related projects for them, providing drinking water and water for sanitation, where we set up the pump houses, solar-driven pump houses, have an entire water pipe network, and then supply to the various kind of blocks of houses. We also have built toilet blocks where the water is also supplied. So all these things are actually on the land of the village, but the asset has been created by Tata Metallics. However, all these assets are owned by the village themselves. So they have a trust, okay, somebody has come and contributed for the community, and it is given to us. And after that, it also leads to some kind of ownership with the community themselves. What happens? These projects have to be on some kind of self-sustainable model, where you corporates build the projects, and then after that, running and maintaining and all those things is resting with the villages themselves. Here in our case, it is a Jan Kalyan Samiti who actually maintains, pays the electricity bills and things like that. So if these assets, suppose tomorrow, are being owned by a Section 8 company, then there would be some kind of lack of trust from the community towards the corporate themselves, thinking, okay, what is it? Same thing, I'll give you another example. Suppose we have schools in the villages of the villages, and we build a, say, library there. We construct a library, have a building, and that library belongs to the school, and the asset, the ownership is resting with the community. So that way, if these assets are owned by Section 8 company, I feel there could be some lack of trust. There's another issue on this is, suppose there are a big asset which normally a company builds on its own expenditure. Suppose there's a school it wants to run, or skill development center that it wants to run. So the building has been made by the company, and it is given to somebody to operate that. So now this building, probably if you want to claim the expenditure as a CSR expenditure, this building will have to be owned by Section 8 of the company rather than the company. So this it would be kindly opposed by the corporates. This is my view.
Thank you, Mr. Mishra. Staying with you, Mr. Mishra, another aspect is CSR Project List reporting on the website as a mandate. What impact does this have on, say, the day-to-day project implementation and management?
I think this is a very good initiative to bring in transparency and responsibility to the board as well as to the organization who are doing CSR activities, so that you think through, plan properly, and then put up the projects. Right now, what happens, the annual reports of the companies are there on the website, and many of the reports, some of the reports carry some of the CSR projects of the past years. So people, stakeholders can refer to such projects. But this provision probably will let you put the current projects which you are implementing, and then so you probably, at whims and fancies, you cannot keep on changing the project. Sometimes many corporates do a lot of projects which are on ad hoc basis, a lot of philanthropic work or any other activity which comes suddenly is being put into the CSR bucket, and so these kind of things will go away, and organizations will become more responsible in selecting the projects. Board would be more responsible. So I think it's a very good provision to bring in accountability for CSR activity.
Thank you, Mr. Mishra. Moving back to Mr. Khaitan, another aspect of transparency is impact assessment, but that I think is a bit of a double-edged sword. So the draft says that the companies with an average spending of CSR amount of ₹5 crore or more in the 3 immediately preceding financial years shall undertake impact assessment for their CSR projects and disclose details of the same in its annual report on CSR. There are lots of, we know there are lots of programs for which impact assessment every year really does not make sense. So where do you think this provision goes?
Sir, let us, first think impact assessment as, as a very, very small exercise, because in any time, any new thing comes, we think of a very big exercise. And let us just try to correlate with the instant lockdown which we have faced. So
Okay.
in 21 days, the impact of lockdown on nature has been observed, that how the nature has healed herself, how Mother Earth has come back again. So impact assessment coupled with need assessment. If you look at the new proposed Rule 5, it talks about need and impact, and then it says if any. And then in Rule 8, for a certain class, it goes and makes it mandatory. So knowing very well that impact assessment is a little detailed exercise, but so many things are happening in the country since long, but then we don't have visible outcomes. We don't have, and that is only because there is maybe not proper planning. Like everybody is doing something from his or her end, but there is no collective exercise. So impact assessment, I really feel, would try to give a sense of direction to the board, because when the responsibility comes to the board and the amount becomes as big as 5 crores, so the responsibility has to be exercised properly and judiciously. That sense of direction should come from somewhere. It will come from impact assessment. And the last point which I would like to put on this is like whether because the major concern is how smaller organizations will do it, how smaller NGOs and trusts will come forward and help the bigger corporates for this. But I feel like this, that whether it is a small organization or it's a big organization or a big corporate, everybody makes a budget. That budget may or may not stand true, but it gives milestones which we meet. So impact assessment is nothing but that kind of a budgetary exercise, not necessarily from financial outgo perspective, but from a outcome perspective, what will happen. So when we make budget, it is not necessary to meet that budget, but when we make the budget, a lot of mind goes into the process as to what we want to do and what we will achieve when we will do that. So I feel that impact assessment will help us identify the future consequences of all the action which will be done. And when the amount is so huge and when the responsibility is on the board now, so it will prove good only. It will not prove as a hurdle. And then a subsequent administrative cost relaxation has also been given for those organizations under Rule 8.3 who will be doing that impact assessment. So it will fairly cover, sir.
Okay. Thank you for putting that apprehension to rest. Now, moving to obviously the most vital factor of CSR is the people who do receive the CSR funds and actually make a difference. Dr. Swati Chakraborty, Assistant Director of CINI. Ma'am, according to the CSR Amendment Rules, this contentious Section 8 of the Act. So it has to be a company established under Section 8 or any entity established under an Act of Parliament or a state legislature. What does this do to small NGOs, etc.? What do you think will be the impact of the corporate CSR projects with NGOs of various kinds and various sizes?
First of all, thank you BCCI, and thanks for inviting us in the webinar. Thanks Sumit for coordinating all the moderators here. I feel when at the time when country is facing a crisis, which is pandemic in nature, when lots of people are suffering from income insecurity, health insecurity, development sector, along with corporates are playing a crucial role at the ground through humanitarian response. The debate, the draft rule, probably it will be a real challenge for everybody, all the NGOs, if it is not articulated, not only, I think, not only about the NGOs, but also for the CSR. It will have to be articulated more elaborately. There are lots of gray sections into it, so more articulation definitely is required. So if I talk about the development sector in India, the heart of the development sector is through NGOs registered through trust or societies. In the present development spectrum, NGOs, NGOs and corporate work hand on hand for the development of the most underprivileged sections of the society. And if we see the current rule, the rule 2020, I think the draft is still not a final one. And NCA has solicited public comments by 28th, and that has been extended. So I feel probably there will be lots of changes, and they will adhere to the suggestions which all the NGO sectors and CSRs will be giving. So if we see the rule 4, what is saying? CSR activities, it says that CSR activities can be undertaken by company itself. It's fine. It can be implemented through Section 8 company. It can be implemented through any entity established under an act of parliament or state legislation. Probably the third one is the crucial one. Probably it need modification. I'll come later. And it also talks about that all the entities will have to be registered itself in the central government for undertaking any CSR by filing e-form. And the form is CSR. So if we read the draft, we can see that MCA is silent about registered charitable trust. They are silent about entities registered under Society Registration Act. And I hope the draft will be amended and registered trusts and societies will be incorporated. And if you see the strategic development spectrum is managed by corporates, CSOs, as well as by the government. So CSOs, the NGOs, have a very, very critical role, and it has a very critical grassroots presence. Interpretation ability of the grassroots problems, interpretation ability of the grassroots solutions are there with the NGOs. And NGOs work at the ground, supplement government's efforts. It supplements government lots of projects which government tries to implement at the ground. And NGOs also tries to reach out to the hardest and most underserved populace of the country. And NGO work towards piloting different solutions which are sustainable, tries to make it sustainable, tries to make it scalable, tries to make it replicable. So we always work for piloting different solutions at the ground. And definitely here corporate plays a major role. So in NGO sector, I think a corporate and NGO sector plays a contemporary role. And we have learned various effective tools from development corporate sectors like efficiency-based model. We have learned input versus output model, different accounting system, which has been incorporated in NGO sector from corporate bodies itself. And it has really enhanced NGO's competency, working efficiency, and accounting transparency. So I feel NGOs and corporate play a dual role. They cannot be at the same page. So definitely, if our government remains silent about registered organization, definitely NGOs will face problem. Loss of trust will face problem, and incorporating in Section 8 companies, it's a time consuming process. It takes lots of time. And both the entities have different type of statutory rules, regulations that needs to be followed. On the other hand, if corporates are supposed to play the role of implementation, they will also face problem. Like for the grassroots implementation, sector needs a different types of HR system, work ethics, work cultures, everything is different. So everything corporates needs to be, they will have to augment all the corporate values within the NGO values, NGO cultures, grassroots level cultures within the corporate bodies also. I think it will be difficult for the corporates also. So in my opinion, I think the rule 4, if just two words can be changed in rule 4, what the rule is saying currently, it says any entity established under an act of parliament or state legislature can probably be modified. And if we can read the sentence like any entity registered under an act of parliament or state legislature, I think it will include definitely. If we redraft the sentence, it will definitely include public sector trust, everything, foundations, and registered entity. or it can also elaborate or specify the word public charitable trust, foundations, or any entity registered under Society Registration Act. I hope ministry will make changes and will definitely take NGOs as a sector and as a collaborative sector rather, and an active actor for geo-corporate integration.
Thank you very much.
I feel this is my opinion about.
Thank you. Mr. Khaitan, do you see the government changing such a, modifying things?
Sir, if honestly you take my personal, very, very personal view, then there has been also instances where proper and correct spending has not happened through the implementing agencies. And it is not that everybody is like that, but definitely there are some wrong instances also. So to bring things in line, the proposed amendment is to bring things in line because the Section 8 company would also be under the control of the MCA, and the corporate which is pending would also be under the control of the MCA. And if the implementing agency comes under the control, then the entire working of that agency, can actually be seen. But nevertheless, the points which Swati madam has pointed out also are a matter of concern because there are so many NGOs existing. So I personally feel, and as a part of recommendations, that certain transition provisions will also come out for a smooth way.
Right.
Nevertheless, Section 366 of the Companies Act, already has the relevant provisions. So it is only a matter of time to just implement that and come out with simple forms so that all the existing organizations who wish to change to the new platform will
Right.
be able. That's right.
Thank you so much. I think it's only appropriate that the final question for the session to the speakers is on a kind of roadmap for the next 2 years for CSR in a post-COVID world. We all know that we are saying that there was life before COVID and now there'll be life after COVID. So after COVID, what is the kind of CSR roadmap that you as specialists in this field see? If I can start with Mr. Kumar, and then if I can request the other speakers to jot down their notes so that they can wrap up in 1 minute each. So Mr. Kumar, if you can just elaborate on it, and then I'll go to the other speakers to touch upon a roadmap for CSR post-COVID.
Oh, no, roadmap for future. It's like future gazing, and particularly since as of now there is not full clarity on what this CSR policy is going to shape up. So unless we know the full clarity of the situation, how it will emerge, and what will be the kind of final notification, I think the can be guessed by that thing.
Yeah.
But I think at this position, particularly this financial year, where all the corporates are finding it, or it will find it very difficult to manage their cash resources, spending. I think the corporates, at least my company and all other corporates, will be more conservative in spending money through CSR. First, there has to be clarity, and first is to overcome this COVID-19 situations. So maybe 21, 22 will be the year when we will have both clarity on the law as well as the impact of COVID-19. Then the corporates will have a more defined strategy to have a policy around this CSR spend.
Thank you so much. Dhruv, can I come to you?
Yeah, sure.
Your CSR prescription would be?
Well, there's a long list, Sumit, but I think one is I think post-COVID, what's going to happen is a lot of people who have sort of been on the fence vis-a-vis their CSR spends will now find a moral obligation to come and start looking at CSR initiatives, whether in healthcare, whether poverty alleviation, whether providing food, so on and so forth. I think that is going to be a very sort of thought-provoking, act really that's going to come into play. The second major trend you're going to see now, especially with this CSR responsibility going to the board is a lot of corporations are going to start looking at these funds, which in my opinion is a disaster. So if you really start looking at funds rather than looking at the actual NGOs, such as what the doctor was talking about, you are really playing into the hands of a very sort of again, I'm the kind of person who uses very, very harsh words. I'm not going to go there, but I think all in all, it is you will see a lot of that happening as well. So you'll see the PM fund again, whether the CM fund falls under CSR benefits or not. That is a question which again should be answered fairly soon. But you will see a lot of action going in there. The overall gist, in my opinion, and again, sort of, is that people should start looking at CSR spends. They should start looking beyond their organization, unless their organization takes on those initiatives that help in, the reduction of this entire sort of calamity. But they should start looking at spends that could help society that have suffered during COVID-19. But all in all, you'll see a movement in that direction.
Thanks, Dhruv. Mr. Mitra, your post-COVID prescription for CSR?
Yeah, actually, we have not yet discussed at the organization level. So maybe this could be my personal view. But what the direction in which we are moving right now, see our two areas of focus of CSR activities, education and essential amenities. We are doing a lot on education, especially the school education and things like that. And in essential amenities, we are actually focusing on water conservation, things like that, providing clean drinking water to people. And now post-COVID, one area where we probably would shift our focus is healthcare, and making people aware of this kind of sanitation and things and providing. So our focus, in fact, on our board, we have a very eminent doctor also. She is there, and she is chairman of our CSR committee of the board. So I'm sure our focus will move towards also activities related to healthcare and
right. Thank you so much. Mr. Khaitan, do you see companies becoming more focused about their CSR spends, choosing a few sectors maybe?
Yes, certainly. And what this COVID has, actually brought out a lot of sensitivities in the people. India has traditionally been a country where even a small salaried employee takes out a little part of his money every month, and in the name of God, he keeps it separately, which is used for philanthropical purposes. But despite that, we had, and we are one of the first countries to put with the law on CSR, despite having this kind of a strong cultural background, irrespective of the communities and the religion. But COVID has brought all this together, and I have seen people from different religions, irrespective of their political affiliations, coming together and helping people wherever possible by contributions in various kinds. I'm not talking only about the CSR law. Now, this sensitivity will prevail in the boardrooms also, and new dimensions in true sense will come up. I know, because people have suddenly got a huge canvas to work upon, which earlier they were not able to spend and they had a problem in explaining. Now there will be no reason not to spend, even if they don't want to contribute. And the second point is, if we look at the prescribed law, if we look at the definition, that is 2F, which is the proposed one, it defines international organization, and it says under section 3 of United Nations Privileges and Immunities Act of 1947. So, and the word immunity has a new meaning to all of us in the last few days. And in the implementing agency portion, the law says that a company may engage in international organizations for designing, monitoring, and evaluating of the CSR projects and programs. And I am sure that with this too also coming into picture, the bigger corporates will now go beyond the nations, and even though the law says that spend will be within India, certainly, but the bringing of the global help and the knowledge in implementing that CSR, identifying those areas with this international organization will be one of the new trends for the bigger corporates.
Thank you so much, Mr. Khattar. Finally, Dr. Chakraborty, do you see NGOs engaged in the healthcare sector suddenly becoming the focus for CSR spending by corporates? She needs to be unmuted. She's on mute.
I think in our organization, we are working on COVID. So we have divided our response in 3 phases. First is during COVID, we are running emergency services. We have Childline, we have CCIs where children are kept. So we have 24 hours offline facilities for children. So we are into it. And then we have divided our services in 2 phases. One is short term, where during the COVID, we can see that people are not in a position to have their job. They are not in a position to have proper food. Children or pregnant mother, they are going into more malnourishment. So we have food driven program or nutrition driven program where through the support of CSR, we are trying to reach out to the most vulnerable children and women and families in urban and rural locations, not only in West Bengal or other than West Bengal, in other areas also we are doing. And then we also perceive that because of this health insecurity, because of this financial insecurity, lots of children will be probably trafficked. Probably they will be entering into the labor forces. There will be lots of insecurities with the family. Abuse cases will be increasing. So we have also developed long-term strategies within the organization so that we can help and support children and their families and have a long-term impact in their lives and make them more resilient. So
Thank you so much.
definitely CSR will be in a good support for us.
Thank you. So now we'll open it up to questions. We'll be taking the first question is from Mr. Jagdish Patra. This is for Mr. Kumar. Does this mean that the board of the company will, in addition to the CSR committee, be responsible for the spending and execution of CSR activities? Mr. Kumar?
I think so. As the language of the draft amendment rules, which has been prescribed, so it has casted the responsibility on the board. So basically the CSR committee, according to me, it remains a reviewing or recommending agencies to the board. But the ultimately responsibility of ensuring, of strategizing, planning, executing, under the rule 4, 5, 7, 9, everything remains to the board. So effectively the board will be responsible for all CSR operations.
Thank you so much. The second question, this is from for Dhruv, please. Subways. Please let us know if spend on COVID-19 with more spend on employees like purchase of thermal meter, sanitizers, face masks, etc. can be classified as CSR spend. So all the money being spent on keeping employees safe, would that be CSR spend is what you mean?
So, some would be, not everything would be CSR spend. There would be a certain allocation which would come under medical, as is normally the case with companies. So ours, for example, we have not currently categorized it as a CSR spend, but we are looking into it depending on the situation going forward. But mostly, we are trying to make other arrangements without affecting the CSR. So again, it depends on, from company to company. For us, we are not looking at this as a CSR, but we're looking at it as an employee benefit and employee engagement initiative. So these are the ways you can actually look at it. Some companies are also looking at it as a medical reimbursement. So again, there are a lot of loopholes that you can work around. There are a lot of ways in which you can now look at a lot of these spends, which earlier you could not. And some of these would be taken into consideration at some point for CSR. I would still request everyone to hold on for a little bit longer I think in the next 2 weeks, once the lockdown starts easing up, you'll get a lot more clarity from the government. I think the government now is focusing more on a sort of relief package post, again, helping people from the health perspective. They're looking at relief packages to bail out the MSME sector, and then they'll start looking at some of these reimbursements from a CSR perspective.
Thank you. Mr. Rajiv Das has two questions. The first one is for Mr. Khaitan. He wants to know which are the activities which are covered under that thing of benefiting 25% of employees, and is Schedule 7 covered by this rule?
Yes, schedule will be covered. One fundamental policy which we have to keep in mind whenever we think of the CSR activity, and
Right.
whenever these doubts come into our mind, whether I'm doing for employee, whether for sanitizer, whether it will be covered or not. If you look at the existing CSR Rule 4, it has a phrase, normal course of business. So whatever I am doing in my normal course of business, that can never be a CSR. And
Exactly.
if you look at the proposed rule, this has also been specifically covered in the definition. So if a employee would be coming in my organization, or a guest would be coming in my office, and I would give him a sanitizer to clean his hands, that is a very, very normal course of way of entertaining a guest in the current circumstances. So I personally don't feel that going by that normal it will become this. Same things will be addressed to that employees, and same things we will stretch it to advertisements, because a lot of questions now come. Now if I am giving an advertisement of, irrespective of any soap or any sanitizer, and I'm issuing it as a health statement, so that is my advertisement. It would not come under, and I would be anyway normal course of business doing it. So the moment we take this principle in mind, that whatever is normal course for my company, then these answers will be clear to us.
Mr. Rajiv Das has another question. As per this is for Mr. Mishra. So as per the new rules, the CSR activity utilization has to be certified by the CFO or the head of finance. How will this certification take place?
Well, this how part is probably not very clearly specified, but
Right.
generally in the corporate, CFO certifies the accounts, which is then finally cleared by the statutory auditors like that. So it is expected that the CSR funds which have been disbursed for various projects have really been spent, and once the CFO certified, then finally it will be certified by the statutory auditors, and it can come into the accounts. That is what I presume it may be. But if any other panelist has some other view, because it's not very clearly mentioned how it will be done.
Thank you. I think Mr. G.M. Kapoor's question was answered during the discussions, but still, Mr. Khaitan, if you can come in on this. Mr. Kapoor of Intact is asking if only Section 8 companies will be eligible. This will leave out all societies and trusts not registered under an Act of Parliament or legislature. This will leave out most of the possible beneficiaries.
So there is a provision of transition under the Companies Act, and I am sure simple routes will be carved out for it. And those existing trusts and societies will be able to very easily get them converted into a Section 8 company. So it is not a question that they will not be able to do that.
I think this is a repeat of that, Ms. Sudipta Tagore. Why under Rule 4 trusts and societies are being left out? What is the thought behind leaving trusts and societies out? Mr. Kumar, if you can come in on this.
So I am not able to hear. Can you please just repeat the question? Sorry.
Why under Rule 4 trusts and societies have been left out? What is the thought behind this?
So I believe there are in some instances in the past, and I think we all know that the current government, so there is a lot of scrutiny for all the NGOs, particularly the international NGOs. So this is a kind of focused area of the government where a lot of scrutinies are happening. So this particular provision probably has some kind of a linkage with the overall, focus of the government. So having said, like in any industry, there are good apples and bad apples.
Right.
By just picking up few bad apples, we should not say that all apples are bad. But I think that the government now want to have more kind of regulated approach for the NGOs. Whether rightly or wrongly, I mean, we are not able to, become a judge for that. But, I think from the government side, it's better. They can regulate in a much better way through the corporate Section 8 companies. But once it is trust, NGOs, foundations, then it is very difficult to exercise some kind of, exercise or supervision upon them. So this is the area which probably, has activated the government machineries that, means they want to probably track the fund flow also till the last mileage. Like all corporates, they can come and say that, how and where the money was spent. But if we say that the money has gone to NGOs as an intermediary, then probably their supervision stops there. They are not able to go beyond and ask the NGOs where you have deployed the fund. So probably, according to me, this is a thought process that is all, kind of a trust or NGOs. They have to register themselves as a Section 8 company so that at some point of time, they will also become answerable to any queries which the government want to on this.
Mr. Kumar, there's a follow-up question from Mr. Jagdish Patra in the first part, the board and the CSR committee. His point is, if the board becomes all powerful, then what is the point of a CSR committee?
Yeah, like as I explained, now CSR committee, probably the intent seems to be more of a recommending body to the board.
Right.
In earlier avatar, it was enjoying a lot more power, and board was to give more on a directional kind of thing to CSR committee. So now the intent of the law is that means of course CSR committee will play its role by reviewing and all kind of doing the activities which is supposed to do that.
Right.
But after that, it has to recommend to the board, and the final buck stops at the board end.
Mr. Atul Singh has a pertinent question regarding timeline. By when is the new CSR rules expected to be passed?
It's very difficult to answer when it is going to, because I believe hundreds of representation has gone from everywhere, from corporate, from NGOs, from individuals. So I think the government has a set process to review all this process, and after reviewing everything, and because now everybody are busy in this COVID situation, so once the things comes back to a little bit normal, and then they will start taking all those recommendations and the amendment, the proposals, and at appropriate time they will come up with a new defined kind of policy on this. But what I sincerely hope that the government should give sufficient time for everybody to ensure and have a clarity and plan out their strategies around the spend if it comes from the next financial year.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kumar. I think it's been extremely educative for me. Actually, I learned a lot of things, and going forward, what one understands it is that whether it's COVID or non-COVID, the whole thing will be what is PSR, that is personal social responsibility, and what is CSR, corporate social responsibility. On that note, I'll hand it back to Mr. Kumar to conclude.
So thank you very much, Mr. Shumit, and I'm grateful to all our guest speakers also to spare their valuable time and trying our level best to provide as much as clarity as possible. And as the visibility we have today, we have tried to kind of answer all the queries which the participants have. And I sincerely hope that participants had a good time listening to us for last 1 hour. So thank you very much. And lastly, I would like to thank BCCI also for organizing this webinar. And so thanks once again to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
to
so
Konna and
much.
team.
Thank you so much, sir. We conclude our today's webinar here. The recording of the entire webinar will be uploaded in our Bengal Chamber YouTube channel. We will also prepare a short note about the entire proceedings of this webinar and will circulate it amongst the speakers, the moderator, as well as the participants of today's program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.